So we said we have self-control problems and we need self-control solutions. And the first type of solution we identify we call reward substitution. The second type of solution I want to talk about is what we call self-control contracts, or Ulysses contracts. And you probably remember the story of Ulysses and the sirens. And the story is that Ulysses knew that if the sirens will sing, he will follow them. So what did he do? He asked the sailors to tie him to the mast and not to let him go. And he asked the sailors to put donag in their ears. And if you think about it, those are two different solutions that are very different from reward substitution. Ulysses himself wanted to hear the sirens, but not to be tempted. And the sailors, he wanted them not to be tempted at all. If you think about it in modern times, it's as if Ulysses himself put his cell phone in the trunk so he could hear his phone ringing, but he couldn't approach it while driving. And for the sailors, he basically turned the phone off, so they were not even tempted. And you can think to yourself which one is the right one for you. But what's important here is that it's very, very different from reward substitution, because you know up front that you're going to be tempted. You know that something will get you to turn you from the rightful path, and you're willing to do something now that would bind your future self to not be able to behave badly. So think to yourself for a minute. I mean, can you think about cases in which you have done something that basically made your future self unable to behave badly? Here are some examples that I hear from people. So for example, often people, when they make an appointment with a personal trainer in the gym, they prepay them. And the condition is that you can't cancel it. And many people say that if they could cancel the appointment with the gym trainer, they would call 10 minutes before and say, you know what, I don't want to show up today, give me my money back. But the fact that they've paid for it forces them to go. Similar, people sometimes buy these 100-calorie cookie packs. Why? They're really expensive. Why not buy the big bag? Well, we think that if we'll buy the big bag, we'll eat many cookies. But if they'll buy small packs, maybe we'll eat just a few. Similarly, my undergrads often tell me that when they get to exam week and they want to make sure that they study and not play on Facebook, they give their computers to a friend and they ask them to log into their Facebook account and to change their password, and not to tell them what the new password is until after exam week is over. This way they basically prevent themselves from misbehaving. Undergrads also tell me that instead of working in their dorm room where they have quiet and flexibility, they sometimes go to the library or to a public space to work. Why? Because they think that if other people watch them, they will not feel as free either to sleep or to do things that are not work-related or study-related on the computers. In a very different domain, by the way, my MBA students, the females, told me a couple of times that if they go on a date and they don't want things to go too far out of hands, they wear very ugly underwear, which also inhibits the probability that something bad or something unplanned would happen down the road. So think about all of those self-control contracts. These are all kinds of things that we do naturally. Now, before we go and think further about this, I want to go back and I want to tell you a little bit about some old experiments about pigeons and rats. So imagine you're either a pigeon or a rat. And imagine that I teach you two things. I teach you that if you see a green button and you press on it, you get 1 pellet of food immediately. But if you see a purple button, you have to wait 10 seconds and then you get 10 pellets of food. And you study this for a very, very, very long period. And you know it very, very well. And now, all of a sudden, I show you both of them together. Which one do you choose? One immediate, or you choose to wait 10 seconds and get 10 pellets of food? And before you make your prediction, I should just tell you that 10 seconds for a pigeon and a rat is like a week for us. Or maybe not a week, but it's a long, long time for us. So it's a really tough decision. So what do you think they choose? They choose the green. They choose the immediate reward, and they forgo the larger delayed reward. It gets slightly worse. You start the trial, the purple button comes up, and they press on it. A little bit of time passes, and then the green button comes up. If they can only hold off, and they can only sit on their paws, resist temptation, do something, they would get the 10 pellets of food. But can they? No. They press the green button and they forgo the 10 pieces of food for the benefit of getting one immediate now. But here's the most interesting thing. The trial starts, the purple button appears, and a little time after that, a red button appears. And the red button is not connected to food, but the red button could turn off the green button. Now it takes a while to learn that that's what it does, but the red button turns off the green button. That's the Ulysses contract. That's the question of whether rats and pigeons will put effort into something that they don't like in order to prevent their future self from being tempted. So what do you think? Would rats and pigeons do it? Would they invest energy in something they don't like to prevent their future self from misbehaving? The answer is yes. They don't do it all the time, but they do it quite frequently. And I think this is incredibly optimistic. First of all, if rats and pigeons can do it, maybe we can do it too. That's the first good news. And the second good news is that it's all about thinking about the world in terms of red buttons. If you take a pigeon and you tempt it, it's going to be tempted. You get a rat, you tempt it, it's going to fail. And us are the same thing. We are just not good in temptation. But sometimes we are going to think up front, and if we're given the right tool, we might behave well. By the way, when we think about temptation, we sometimes divide people into two types, what we call naive and sophisticated. The naive people are people who don't think that they're going to be tempted. The naive people are people who said, oh, I have no problem with procrastination and self-control and overeating. When I get to that situation and the waiter asks me if I want a chocolate souffle as dessert, I can easily say no to them. The sophisticated people are the ones who said, I know that when the time will come, I will be tempted. And because of that, I'm willing to take steps now to prevent my future self from being tempted. And if you think about it, maybe if we educated people to a higher extent about our self-control problem and created more red buttons, created more ways for us to bypass our temptation, maybe people would behave much, much better. So let me give you some examples for this. The first example is this alarm clock called Clocky. And Clocky is an alarm clock designed by one of the students in the Media Lab. The one on the left was the original version, and the one on the right is a commercial version, a little less cuddly, but still useful. And you see the big wheels. And what happens with Clocky is it has two big wheels that run in slightly different speeds. Now what happens? When you go to sleep, you set up your alarm clock for 6 o'clock in the morning, and in your mind, you're the kind of person who gets up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go for a run before you go to school or before you go to work. But what happens when 6 o'clock in the morning actually comes around? The reality is that you're probably no longer that person. Now you're a person who kind of looks for the snooze button. But if you have Clocky, Clocky also starts running around. The moment the alarm starts up, it runs around the room. And you have to go and chase it and run after it. It's unpredictable because there's a random component to it. And not only that, but the snooze button is really below the clock, and you have to find it and flip it over and find where the snooze button is. And by the time you find Clocky and you hunt it down, you know what? You are awake. And therefore, you might actually go for a run. The design flaw, what I think is a fatal design flaw of Clocky, by the way, is that by the time you're up and you found Clocky and you hunted it down, you're also pissed off. So if you do an image search online, you'll find lots of pictures with Clockies with the wheels torn off, which of course don't represent very well this benefit for self-control. And now I think that they're going to an earlier design by another friend of mine, which basically made a more of an egg-shaped version, which could basically not be broken. No parts to break when you're angry with the clock. There's another version I like even more. This is the version that never became commercial, but the idea is great. It's an alarm clock called Snooze and Lose. And it's an alarm clock that is connected to your bank account. And not only to your bank account, but it's connected to a charity you hate. Now here it is. You get this alarm clock and you set it up. Now what would happen if you connected it to a charity you liked? Now if the alarm clock goes up, you could say to yourself, ooh, I get to snooze, plus I get to give money to trees, let's say. But if you're sophisticated, you understand how self-control works, then you might set it to give to a charity you really hate, and now there's no way you can snooze. There's no way you could sleep, and think to yourself that every second you're slipping some money, even very, very small amount, is going to somebody you really, really hate. There's other examples for this. One of those is a website I really like called Stick, and I highly recommend that you try and visit it and actually try experimenting with it. Now, we did a couple of experiments on this. One of them included a Chinese restaurant called Panda Express, in which we tried to see whether people are willing in advance to limit their ordering in order to force their future self to eat less. And the answer was that yes, people were doing it quite successfully. We looked at whether people would be willing to pay in advance for medical procedures in a way that they would get the money back if they showed up for the medical procedure, but not if they got late and so on. And people are willing to do it. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to think about how this would work out and introducing such mechanisms into the market.